Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Breaking Badness cybersecurity podcast. I am your co-host, Callie Fensel. Joining me this week is Aaron G. Cleff. You've seen him before on the Breaking Badness podcast. Welcome back, Aaron.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you. And we are so excited. We are privileged to be joined by Heidi and Bruce Potter, the co-founders of the ShmooCon conference, which just wrapped up its final year this year. Thank you, Heidi and Bruce, for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
We're happy to be here.
Awesome. For our listeners that might not know you two, can you give us a little background on who you are and what your roles have been in the InfoSec industry?
Go first?
No, I'll let you go first. It's much more exciting when you make things up.
So I've been doing cyber for about 30 years. And we actually met in Alaska back in the early 90s and ended up working for the largest ISP in the state, bringing internet to places like Slope and Aleutians and that kind of thing. And we took two different paths. I'll talk about mine and you can talk about yours. I ended up getting knee deep in as a cyber operator, doing cybersecurity for some startups, and then ended up at Booz Allen running a chunk of their national security research business, ran a company here in Maryland doing DARPA and other research and commercial work, and sold that about 10 years ago. Did a few stints at CISOs in various places, and now run a small cybersecurity product company. So dropped out of college and fortunately landed into a career that is fun and has paid the bills and that kind of thing. So spoken a lot, write a lot, all that kind of good stuff. And generally, I've enjoyed the ride, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do the work that I do and have the impact that I've had. What about you?
What about me? It's interesting. Bruce really didn't touch a computer until you were, 17, 18 years old. I had the complete opposite experience despite growing up in Alaska. I was on the internet basically as it was entering the universities and stuff. So I had a .edu account when I was in sixth grade or something like that. And I was writing VMS man pages when I was in sixth and seventh grade. So that's my one nerdy claim to fame when I was young. But like Bruce said, we met in college, got married. And then I took a big step back from all of this because I wanted to raise a family and do all the things, but I had to find ways to still be involved. And when we started the Shmoo group and then the genesis of the con, which came out really of that group, gave me a way to stay in touch and be a big part of this community, which has always just been a part of who I am. And then through that, other ways to be around and volunteer and be a part of everything that's going on.
Very cool. That's awesome. And ShmooCon was a huge institution. It ran for 20 years. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Aaron on the podcast too, because he went to all 20. I was only privileged enough to go to the last one. So I'm a one and done person. But for the people that might not know, what was it? How did it form? And I'm also Aaron shared the lore with me on where the name came from. I think our listeners would be interested in that too.
It's really a stupid story. So I wasn't there actually at the Genesis. That was Bruce and Beetle and just the two of you, maybe one other person. They were sitting at a bar. I will say it was a bar. It wasn't at a bar.
It was at a talk.
Was it a talk?
Yeah, we were at a talk.
See, I always tell it was at a bar on the back of a napkin, which is.
So instead of being at a bar saying we should open our own bar, you're we should start an InfoSec conference.
Yeah, it's just like that.
Yeah, we were sitting in some talk at Black Hat, and Beetle was a Shmoo group member at the time, and we had spoken a bunch of times on a bunch of wireless security research we had done. And we got to Black Hat that year, and we were listening to some talk, and the person on stage was saying just some shenanigans, and nobody was calling the person on it. And normally he and I would be the person to stand up and be like, I think that's idiotic, and push him. But we were trying to be kinder, gentler people. And so we waited for somebody else and nobody said anything. And he was like, wow, if we ran our own conference, we would never let that stand. I'm like, yeah, totally.
You never say things like that to Bruce.
Yeah.
Just don't.
And so then Beatles, we should run our own conference. I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Fist bump. And I didn't actually think much of it after that. And then a couple weeks later, after we got back from Vegas, he called us and he was like, so I took out a second mortgage at my house and got some space in the DC area, and we're going to have a conference.
And he's also, I didn't tell my wife, so we need to make this work.
Yeah,
and
we need
Bruce
to make
and I
sure
were like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
And there we went.
Yeah.
And so
that was the start.
Yeah, that was the start of the con. As far as the name goes, we are called what we are called mostly because we were broke.
Yeah. So back at Internet Alaska, I was running system and network operations, and Heidi was leading up a bunch of marketing work and customer service work. One day we were having a staff meeting on the tech side, and one of the guys who worked for us, Andrew, was dating a woman who dropped off his lunch for him, which when you're in your early 20s and you're a sysadmin and your girlfriend drops off your lunch, it's going to it's going to cause some good natured kind of.
I think if she had just dropped off the lunch, that would have been fine.
The issue became that when someone said he's in a staff meeting, you can't, go back there right now. She said, no problem, I'll just leave it here. And she wrote, "For my little schmooikins" on the bag. And man, when you're 22-year-old sysadmin and your girlfriend calls you schmooikins, like that will not stand. And so from that point forward, everybody just started calling him Shmoo. And so he ended up registering
a domain name.
Yeah, registered shmoo.com as a domain name. And then through a series of events, he ended up living with us. And so we ended up hosting
several times over many years.
Yeah, over many years. Yeah, Shmoo's lived in her basement repeatedly. He's not a troll, he's a real person. But
we like him very much.
Yeah, so he ended up living with us, and we hosted a domain on some gateway Pentium 120
under my desk. It lived at my feet for years.
Under Heidi's desk. And then Shmoo moved away and went to California for a job. And I decided I was going to start some weird hacker collective thing, and we were dirt poor and we couldn't.
Oh yeah, this was back when like domains for like the cost of a single domain for a year was like over $100.
Yeah, it was
right? It's not money we had.
Yeah, we did not have the money to spend it. And so amusingly, when we all worked at Internet Alaska together, the tech support team was called Tech Support Group, or TSG, at alaska.net. And we thought it would be hilarious for a bunch of ex-Internet Alaska folks to be
we were so funny.
The Shmoo Group, TSG, at shmoo.com. And so I started grabbing people and putting them together into this group and under the TSG moniker. And so it was just a domain we had. It made a cute pun. And so we just became the Shmoo Group.
It's a non-story. It's really just because we couldn't afford another name when it comes down to it.
And we did inadvertently cross-post, which was hilarious. There'd be like internal TSG email, like Shmoo Group email that we would send to the TSG at alaska.net. And the tech support people, "Are you trying to open your ticket? Also, what cryptography are you talking about?" Oh, sorry. Wrong thing altogether.
Yeah.
I like that story though. I think it's cool. Like I had thought, I'm like, it has something to do with schmooze, I think that word maybe, but I like the story a lot better. I think it's got a lot of character to it. So after the first conference, can you talk about the experience of doing it for the first time and what that felt like and the reaction from attendees after that?
Yeah, so from the very first conference, have run it out of our home. And so the first year it was weird. We didn't know, I don't know that we really knew what was going to happen. So there were about, I think at the time, 30 people in TSG in the Shmoo group. And the rule was we all had to buy our own ticket and we all had to convince 10 people to come because we were trying to sell 300 tickets. So like we all have 10 friends. Do we all have 10 different friends? Okay, maybe we all have 10 different friends. Can we convince 10 different people to come? Or at least maybe 5 and they can all bring a +1, something like that. But yeah, we all bought our own tickets for the first few years because we weren't sure we were going to, make any money. But it was an odd, that first year we got the program printed at Kinko's like the day before. There was only one t-shirt. Getting people to speak was actually not as difficult as I think we anticipated, but that's largely just due to the reach we had and that there wasn't something like this on the East Coast at the time. But we sold out the first year. We hit our numbers, but it was still, I think it was a huge learning experience. We nailed it, I think, that first year. It was exhausting. I learned a lot about sleeping.
Yeah, and there's so much duct tape and baling twine that goes into the early days of this stuff. And so people were like, Shmoo Group members just rolling in with, "Here's a bunch of APs." And someone's like, "I got a couple servers I'll bring." And people are just dragging trash out of their house basically to build the infrastructure and make it work. And so it was quite an effort to like pave a bunch of servers and access points and get them set up for the con and do all kinds of things. So it was a lot of superhuman effort by a bunch of people just making it work. And we were fortunate that we had a big enough group of people.
And it's really smart people too. Band-aiding things was pretty easy to do along the way. Problem solving wasn't our problem.
No. When you have enough horsepower and enough motivated people, you can tackle problems as they come. So we were very fortunate.
I've said this time and time again, but one of the most amazing things about this entire experience has always been the team. Yeah. Always been the team. Hands down. One of the greatest honors in my life has been working with the people that have volunteered for us. And so many of them have become close friends. Yeah.
And that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask, because the conference runs on primarily volunteers. Did it start out as mostly
100% volunteers? Yeah.
Did it start out as mostly TSG members and grow from there?
It did. In the early days, the actual TSG, the Shmoo Group involvement was really super high. We were much more active in those days. It was 20 years ago, as that group was much more active and was doing a lot more projects and stuff together. That's changed. We've all gotten older and our interests so much have changed, but our time and commitment to outside projects has maybe gone in different ways. But as the conference grew, we also just needed more manpower. So there are still a large number of TSG members involved, but obviously, as you guys attended the conference and maybe can see, especially Aaron, if you've been there the whole time, it's vastly outpaces what we would call members of the ShmooCon group anymore, but out of necessity. But also those who are in TSG who wanted to continue to be involved are still involved. And that's great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you make these kind of, I'd say, weird ad hoc groups that nerds make.
There's nothing legal about that group. Nothing.
No, there was no formal anything. Yeah. It was just like a mailing list, and that was the glue that held everybody together. A lot of us did it because, especially 25, almost 30 years ago, when we started.
That was actually the genesis of the group.
It was the best way to learn, is because the internet was still nascent, and getting together and having a group of people to move your career forward, move your knowledge forward. And as you get older and deeper in your career, those kind of connections and that kind of learning, I think, takes a little bit of a back seat. Plus, over time, like, access to information in the space has changed dramatically. Like, we used to have to go to Vegas to go to DEF CON to learn. And now you're like, I'm just going to watch all that crap on YouTube on a random Tuesday. And so it was, I think, a lot of the environment's changed, and that's caused some of the group members to, over time, just fade out, which is totally cool. But it's been an interesting dynamic.
Our ability to drive it too is faded. Kids' life.
Yeah. And I think what's amusing, though, is then people brought coworkers to bear. And there was, for some reason, a bunch of ShmooCon folks that worked at MITRE. And so we ended up with like a MITRE mafia, where a whole bunch of MITRE folks were some of the early days volunteers, and all the workers that got a lot of the back behind the scenes stuff done. And a lot of them are still attached in some fashion. Many of them are involved in Hack Fortress, but other parts of the organization. But the MITRE mafia was like the backbone of the con for a while, where half the cyber people at MITRE would just roll up, put on t-shirts and do stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, but I'd say our volunteer corps, we have about 100 volunteers who've been helping out with the con now since we capped at 2,200, 2,300 people. That's about the amount of people we need on the ground to keep it running. But one of the things that I've been so fortunate is that they're loyal. They come back, and they seem to not mind showing up for 3 days out of every year. And some of them obviously put in a lot more work before the con ever starts too, but it's been incredible.
Yeah.
Did they all find you? The ShmooCon group you already had connected, but the folks beyond that, was that just natural sort of organic growth? Did you ever have to put up a flag saying, "Oh God, I need help, we've gotten too big"?
No, it's funny. So many other conferences do have a call for volunteers. It's depending how they're structured. Like in like the B-sides world, that's a very common thing, like a call for volunteers. Maybe in the very early days, we did that, maybe not officially, but just while we were out talking to folks. But I've never put out a public plea for volunteers. It's usually, as we grew, we've already had conversations with folks. You've already identified people who would be, valuable, or people who wanted to come and be on staff. It's a great way. I've always had a hard line about tickets. One of the things that, not to get super negative or anything, but one of the things that was levied against us a fair bit in the early years, when ticket sales would fall down a lot and people went cranky about that, was there's this idea that people thought that we were giving the tickets away to all of our friends. And so I've always drawn a really hard line. I actually really have never done that. And the way I got around that is I just made them all come work. All of them. There's plenty of people on staff who I never really knew until we did those initial, "Hey, do you want to come work? Let's have a conversation." But there's a number of people on staff, of course, that I knew prior as well. But yeah, it just grew, and it's recommendations by other staff members. Sometimes see somebody doing something at the con that's really awesome, and you just recognize that, hey, we've got space for you because this is cool.
Yeah, I think if you compare what ShmooCon did versus other events, like when you start out with a relatively large group of people, it's pretty easy to organically grow the base of volunteers and people that help with the event. If you look at some of these B-sides and whatever, you get one or two people who are just like, "I want to go do this," which is awesome. But then they're in the mode of having to build a coalition of the willing that want to come and do these things. And we were fortunate, we just started past that hurdle. So it's hard to overstate how valuable that was, to like never worry about people helping, never worrying about, are we going to sell enough tickets to do the thing that we're going to do? We were pretty fortunate to know the kind of the four walls of what was going to happen every year before the con would even start.
Well, and we worked hard to like foster that sub community within our volunteers as well. So it's
And then from like the attendee side, Aaron, what was attending the first ShmooCon like for you? I guess, how did you hear about it, and what made you want to come back year after year?
So I heard about it from a group called Security Geeks DC, which is doing a bunch of lectures and stuff. So it's like a meetup before Meetup existed. And a number of the ShmooCon folks were involved in Security Geeks DC. And I heard about it through that. The first experience was fantastic. There's a friend of mine who teases me actually because I was trying to have dinner with her after the ShmooCon ended, and I called her and she said, I couldn't understand a word you were saying. You were talking so fast. It felt a lot more immediate than like DEF CON or Black Hat. DEF CON and Black Hat were already pretty big by the early 2000s, and they've only gotten worse. And it felt a lot more, I don't want to use the word homey because that's...
It was intimate though. The first one especially was, like I said, right around 300 people, including volunteers and speakers, right? We always include those in our numbers. Just a smaller event. I remember the minute it was over, laying down on one of the benches right outside the main track room and basically falling asleep. So that's what I remember.
I had forgotten about Security Geeks. Holy
That's
cow.
a lot. Yeah, I'd forgotten about it too until you said that. That's crazy.
Man.
That was a long time
All the
ago.
wacky projects that we did. That was
That's like 23 years ago.
Mhm.
good
Yeah.
God.
So that's not still running.
No.
Oh,
Like not to our knowledge.
Well, that's
anyway.
maybe somebody
Yeah,
picked
maybe
up the
somebody
thing.
picked it up,
That was
but-
a weird, wacky thing that we started to trying to get. Oh my God, we had so many weird projects. We had that. We tried to build a community
I
wireless
totally forgot
network
about that.
in the
Con
DC area.
it?
Yeah, it turned into Nova Wireless. There was a movement on the West Coast to do like community Wi-Fi networking in like Seattle and Portland and other cities where people would build a mesh and then you could connect to the metro mesh wherever you were. And this is 2000, 2001 when Wi-Fi was just starting to be a thing. And so some of the early Shmoo group members were leaders in those areas. And in that case, like it was very much like they had a problem where they would build the network and not enough people would use it because people weren't really, Wi-Fi was not as ubiquitous as it was today and that kind of thing. So Beetle and I decided we were going to start
Connet.
originally it was
Capital
Connet
Area
wireless network, and then we turned it into Nova Wireless because the people in Maryland got cranky of this seems to be all Nova, so we
Which,
changed it to Nova
Fun
Wireless.
fact, is still the name of our house network.
Yeah, it's still the name of Restless ID at Home, which is hilarious. But we started that up, and then we had the exact opposite problem because in 2000, 2001, you could see WorldCom headquarters from a house in Ashburn, and the fastest connection you could get was a dial-up, right?
Yeah.
And so when here's two nerds being like, hey, we're going to build a community mesh network that covers all Northern Virginia, people like, can I connect my house and do all my internet over this? We're like, no, as a matter of fact, don't do that.
Oh my gosh, Bruce, I think we have a Connet t-shirt downstairs.
Yeah, we still, it was a brutally bad graphic design that we did at the time. I mean, it was just awful, but like we had these regular meetings and people get together and hack up stuff. And then Security Geeks was another project that we spun up trying to get people to get together and talk
We
about.
had forgotten about half of this. This is crazy. Oh my God.
Yeah, and so all of that
Come a long
died.
way.
ShmooCon's the one thing that stuck around for a while, but all the rest of that like eventually burned out because it takes so much energy, right? Like those are the kind of the projects. Like if Beetle and I weren't showing up to a Nova Wireless meeting, there was nobody else that was going to run it and make anything productive. So like after 2 years of doing that nonsense, we're like, oh my God, I can't do another Tuesday meeting with just Jay Rando that rolls up and has weird wireless problems that needs us to troubleshoot it.
I mean, of course we'll answer all your questions.
Yeah. We would do it happily if we showed up, but there were times we were like, I got a kid that's sick or appendix. I don't know, something. I'm not
Yeah.
making it.
oh my gosh. So, yeah, like things have obviously changed since the early 2000s. Of course, cybersecurity changes. How would you, and this question is for all of you really, how would you say the conference evolved along with cybersecurity as an industry?
I can tell you the choices we made along the way, but Aaron, I'd be really super interested in how you observed any of those changes. They were pretty subtle changes on our end and purposefully, but
Some of it you could tell there were themes that would change over the years. There was a keynote about 3D printing that was promising in 4 years we'll be able to 3D print anything. And I remember walking out of that talk going, that's totally cool. Then 2 years later going, hey, whatever happened to that? So the themes generally changed. I felt like once it landed at the Hilton, a lot of the structure really set. It was very differentiated, the earlier ones. It became a lot more stable for what you could expect once it landed at the Hilton. And yeah, the subjects were all over the place, and that was always nice. You could say, I'm not going to see another freaking firewall talk, because you would eventually get bored with it too, and that was great.
You build an event partially around the venue that you're in, right? And you make the best use of the space that you can. And when we were at the Marriott in the early days, I think we played around with a bunch of ideas, but I do think once we got to the Hilton, we knew really based on just the general layout, what's going to work, what's going to help people flow and meet and run the events and whatever.
I was
And
very calculated when I chose that event. I'd learned enough in the previous years to know what I was looking for. And so when we went down and looked at that venue, it resonated with the type of event that we wanted to run at the size that we wanted to eventually host it at. And it's something that when I talk to other conference, people who either are starting or even if they've been running an event for a while, it can sometimes be the missing piece. Your venue is one of your staff members, treated as such. It's an integral part of the equation. It's not just where you show up, right?
Yeah.
And you have to fold it in the right ways. I think the other thing is we have, just in little ways over the years, changed the focus of our tracks. They've always been wide open, like within those tracks, but we've provided some definition within those lanes, like other conferences. But our choices have been maybe a little different.
Yeah, I think one thing that happened over time with, especially as more conferences came online, is that the popular talks, if you will, were attacks and cute hack tricks, right? Like I did a neat thing and I hacked this thing and whatever. And it made news and whatnot. But I think our general assessment was that kind of stuff is cool, but doesn't necessarily push the ball forward. We've always run the event in an effort to push the community forward and help. And offensive talks, while necessary, were easy to find in other venues, and we didn't feel were necessarily in the same strike zone that we were.
Or that we wanted to be in. I mean, it's all what you choose to do.
Yeah, and we maybe 10, 12 years ago made determination. We'll take a few offensive talks, but it's certainly going to be biased toward more strategic and defense and that kind of thing.
Research and out of the box.
Yeah. And that, I think, set us apart in a lot of ways.
And first-time speakers. Now, it's amazing how much, if you rotate on that, how much it actually changes your program. So that's something that we really emphasis on.
Bias toward to new work and new people. And we've heard the story over and over from folks where my big break was the talk I gave at ShmooCon was the first talk I ever gave, kind of thing, which is great. It's awesome to be able to give people that stage and the microphone for the first time.
We went to a networking event yesterday, and one of the people at the event came up to me. And actually, that was one of the things that they remarked on, is that they were floored by how many people had their first speaking engagement at ShmooCon.
Yeah.
And did not realize, and they were one of them, but how many other people who they consider community icons, whatever, who had their first speaking opportunity, like big speaking opportunity at ShmooCon. And of course, we don't take any credit for any of that. We're just feel honored and privileged to have been a small part of the journey and to have provided a space for that.
Yeah. And I think something else has happened in the industry in general is there's obviously been a huge investment in events, and you can go to other events and let's say the production quality is very high, right?
Now we're duct tape and spin.
Custom stuff, and they got the announcer from the UFC games bringing people on the stage, and it's all like this fancy, and the lights are spinning and all that. And modulo like a few tweaks to like tech cameras and
he's pointing at all the lights.
We're literally using an old ShmooCon gear for this thing. There's a lectern, there's a microphone. Your slides are going to show up there.
For those
you may not
of you
even
who
see
were at the conference this year, that was proper use of the term lectern and not podium.
Podium is the thing you stand on. A lectern is the thing you stand behind. So anyway, I think that we've always been focused on the message and just making sure that we're not getting lost in like ramping up the production quality and a bunch of stuff. And not to fault people that are going down that road, because I think if you go to DEF CON, and like the DEF CON art scene is very strong and visually the place can be very stunning. And that was just never our thing. And I think it helped people even feel comfortable on stage, right? You don't feel like you're walking into Wembley to give your first concert as like a third grader playing the violin, right? Where you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so overwhelming. Now this is still just a stage and it's weirdly lit and go crazy. And I think it helped people feel comfortable to get up there.
And not spending money on those kinds of things allowed us to keep our prices low over the years and things like that. So I mean, those decisions were made purposefully, allowed us to keep we had a ton of sponsors, but allowed us to keep that under control as well. And all those things.
Yeah. And I don't know because I guess first was my first opportunity to have a speaking engagement. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I think what helped with the comfort too, I don't know if other conferences do it, because again, this was my first time speaking, is Heidi held that know before you go meeting.
Yeah, the informational session. Yeah.
And that really made me feel comfortable, especially really leaning on this. It's casual. Don't show up in a 3-piece suit. It's very, I'm like, okay, like I can wear what makes me comfortable. I don't have to dress up and pretend to be something I'm not necessarily. So I think that was really helpful too. And then my presentation was on Saturday. So I had Friday to see other people give their presentations and use colorful language, and I'm just like, okay, this is what we're doing.
I know that our other conferences do offer sessions like that. I don't know how many in this space really do that, and I've encouraged it when I've talked to other folks. I only started doing that 4 or 5 years ago, and I wish I'd started doing it a lot earlier, because sometimes it all seems so obvious. I'm sitting there and I'm telling you the little things, like it's okay to, if you get lost, just to stop for a second. It's going to feel like an eternity to you, but it isn't to the audience. You taking 3 breaths is that long, right? But if you're up there and you're nervous, it feels a lot longer. But hearing those things can really help. And I think that when we started doing that, we've gotten such positive feedback from those sessions.
Yeah. And I think because we've tried to be as transparent and open and as a resource to the community in general, we recognize action in that space is better than just wishful thinking. And years ago, as more and more conferences were coming online, there was getting to be a rep in the HackerCon community where they weren't necessarily the safest place. And there were all these kind of issues with how they were run and reporting incidents and that kind of thing. And so Heidi went and created a whole training program for all of our volunteers where we would set expectations, provide here's what you can expect from us as the organizers, here's what we expect from you, but then also went through and did role playing and helped arm them for understanding how to report, how to deal with all kinds of different adverse situations from fire to assault and all that kind of stuff. And we've been doing that for over a decade now, and quietly, just to be like, it's not just to put words on a page of we care about you. It's like we actually implemented a program. And then even with COVID, the first year after COVID and all the vaccine requirements, we had to go through and check. And I thought, we're just going to go to the internet and grab the big book of vaccine verification with all the weird way that states handled it and different apps and all that kind of thing. And it turns out there was nothing out there.
Yeah,
and
we
so
wrote our own.
We built our own, it was like a 40-page guide on how to verify vaccine status on all these different platforms and how to guide people through, help them find the screen on their phone and all that kind of stuff. And I actually ended up taking that to work when we had our RTO at my last company and we had to do all the vaccine checks. And here's the book to use. Where'd you get it? We built this for another reason. We shared
it with a couple other conferences. That window was relatively short in hindsight, right? But it existed.
Yeah. And we didn't want to put our volunteers in a position, because what we're trying to solve for is A, run a safe con, but B, also put the volunteers in a position where there's a very clear set of guidance. If somebody rolls up with this Post-it note said, I got jabbed, and be like, that's not on the list of acceptable things that we're gonna allow. And so it puts them in a better position to have a conversation with the attendee and then bring us over and then talk to the person and whatever. And
it worked really well.
We
had almost no issues with any of that. I think the one time that there was maybe just even a minor issue was pretty funny, because the person was actually talking to one of my children and name dropped me to them. Said something like, I'm going to go talk to Heidi about that. And my kid was like, okay, you just go try that.
Give that a shot. Let me know how it works out.
Let me know how that works out for you. Anyway, it was funny. And it was a non-issue in the end. It was all fine. It was just, it's pretty funny. But yeah, writing that document and in the training that Bruce was talking about, I do that sort of in-depth stuff more with just the security staff, because they really are the ones who interact maybe the most, besides the folks at Reg. Everybody else, when we come together for an all hands, gets maybe a lighter version of it. But I ask only really a couple hard things from our staff. And I think the number one charge that they get year after year is that all of our interactions, they're led with kindness. And that's it. If we start there, we're going to be okay. But we start from a place of assuming the best of people and of ourselves. Yeah. And if we can start there, we'll inevitably find a good place to end. So, and
I feel like that's vibe setting for the whole rest of the con in a lot of ways. Because I remember noticing, I went to PyCon for the first time in 2019. I remember feeling like this is different than like Black Hat and DEF CON, because you don't feel the sort of inherent aggression of every other person around you at a PyCon. But it was, so ShmooCon felt like it was halfway between what you'd expect from a DEF CON and like PyCon. PyCon, somebody stumbled on a speech at one point and the audience just applauded for it. Come on, you can do this. You can do this. And I felt like that was much more likely to happen at a ShmooCon than at a DEF CON.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that part of it is that we've tried to be inclusive of everybody and wherever they're coming from and meet them where they are at the event. And so a lot of students, a lot of people new in their career, and just generally not putting up with a lot of shenanigans when it comes to cultural issues. And security is generally still a very cynical industry to be in. And so you're filled with cynics and people who aren't very trusting of other people and whatever. And so that causes all kinds of interesting behavior. But I think when you give them an environment where it's cool, we can support each other, we can all be in this together, even if we're coming from different places, I think you end up with really good outcomes. And having a wide variety of people attend, from the students that you've always had, even the service academies that have come very regularly since the very beginning, all the way through to directors of federal agencies and that kind of thing show up. And that diversity then adds like a whole bunch of different voices to the room, which causes a different set of conversations than if we were all exactly the same type of people showing up to have the same conversations we've had 1,000 times.
Right. And there's things we've done quietly, overtly and quietly to increase that over the years. Concentrating on the student involvement in the next generation was one of the ways I chose to really focus on bringing more diversity into the conference. And it seems like maybe a weird trajectory to do that. But to me, there's no better way than to encourage the next generation to open the doors in that regard. But there were other things we did, just even in the terms of the language that you use in your call for papers, the language around it, in and around your website. We're not always successful at it, but you avoid the use of words that are, as an example, like too masculine, right? Or aggressive, words that cause people to shy away.
Yeah, because you don't want people self-selecting out of attending or applying or whatever. And even the word choice in your CFP and on the website make a difference as far as, do people feel comfortable? Because I think what's a common refrain in cybersecurity events of all shapes and sizes is people will self-select out because, quote, I don't know enough, right? We just had a conversation last night at a networking event where a person who was obviously technical and maybe not like an operator, like not putting fingers to keyboard or slinging code, but still knew his stuff, was just like, I wasn't technical enough to go. And we're like, what?
And
you know,
and it always floors me because I will literally tell people, listen, no matter what room we're in, I am the least technical person in the room. I guarantee it. And maybe not always, but often I am the least technical person in every single environment I am in, because I hang out with super nerdy, technical, smart people. And it's my favorite place to be always. And it was super sad that I was like, and the guy never made it because he never thought that he would be a fit, but he knew all about it, was super excited to pick our brains. But yeah. And it's such the wrong attitude.
And for a conference like ours, which I think we do a pretty decent job of being open and inviting, I can't even imagine looking at a DEF CON or others, and I'm not trying to throw shade, but man, there's a lot going on. Like, you look at DEF CON, you're like, what do I even do?
I mean, let's be clear. It's also because tickets were hard to get.
Yeah, that's true. When you sell out in 20 seconds, there is also a natural limiting factor of your ability to attend. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
That might have been part of it too. But
okay. Heard.
Okay.
What was that experience like when you decided we're going to cap the tickets at a certain number, and that's just what we want to do? What was that like?
I don't actually think that was the issue. I don't know. I think we have a very different point of view on this than I think the rest of the world does. But the decision to cap attendance was made purely because logistically it's what we could handle. Again, running this out of our home, the amount of hours we wanted to dedicate to certain activities, but also that size felt right. It was large enough you were always going to meet new people and have new experiences, and yet still small enough that you probably know somebody, be able to find them easily. It was the best of both worlds, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The ticket sales thing, that took on its own life. And I don't, for the life of me, once it became a thing, it stayed a thing, right? It just, the lore and the story, it became like the self-fulfilling prophecy over the years.
Yeah. Once you sell out quickly, you'll always sell out quickly, because it just builds I have to do it. And then everyone shows up at that time. And so we sold out every year. And it's funny, I remember the one year, because we ran our own shopping cart basically from the beginning, and the cart has evolved substantially over the years. And one year in the cart, we wrote it, and we knew there was a bug that if multiple people tried to buy a ticket in the last second of availability, we could potentially oversell. And we're like, that's really funny that we might have multiple people trying to buy a ticket at the same second. And
indeed.
And then 2 years later, we sold like 10 extra tickets by mistake because it sold out so fast.
Which is fine. I mean, we honored those.
Yeah, for sure. But it was just this got weird. And so the accelerator was really fully on the floor by that point. And I think, Aaron, you'll remember in the early days,
in the Moose cluster,
it was also pay what you think it was worth, right? And so there was a tiered structure where you could pay whatever, 50 or 100 or 200 bucks, whatever it was. And then it became just pay what you can get your hands on. And we realized that tiered thing ain't going to work anymore.
Yeah, I did away with the tiered pricing and went to the flat structure when year 4, maybe 5.
4 or 5, somewhere around there. Yeah.
I think when we did away with the tiered pricing, it made things simpler for us. And that may have been part of that frenzy. Everybody wanted the early bird pricing. That did its job in the day, but then that needed to go away.
Yeah.
But I think ShmooCon was certainly popular. There's no denying that. But I think that had we opened ticket sales wide open, I don't think it's this ginormous event that people think it is.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been a 20,000 person
Yeah.
thing.
At best, we may have doubled our attendance
Yeah,
at
maybe.
best. And so this is just the reality. What we see when we see who's hitting the sales dates and who's
Yeah.
attending, right?
I think so. As the ticket sales evolved and we learned technical lessons about how to support the load, at some point, the long pole in the tent was we used some weird CMS that we had built ourselves, which was awful, to run the sales. And then we eventually, I think, swung it over to WordPress hosted locally. And we would post a link on WordPress.
And then they had regional delays.
And no, this is before.
Oh, before that.
Yeah,
even.
yeah. This is
okay.
us hosting it. And so it ended up knocking over our own server that was hosting WordPress. And I'm like, we're going to solve this with a load balancer and a bunch of systems. So we had all these computers we were using for Hack Fortress, and they're just PC, like gaming PCs. I'm like, these things are monsters. And so we went down to the data center, and I remember
literal huge desktops.
Yeah, we took these desktops, and I tried to jam them sideways into the rack, and the feet didn't fit, like the little rubber feet. So I literally, every one, I would just run at the rack and just pow, and the feet would shoot out across the data center as they got knocked off. And then the thing was like jammed in the rack. And so I stacked as many of these things into the rack as I could.
Somewhere.
Yeah, and then just racked it up. And this will work, and it totally did not. Like there was no way that even if we had tripled, that there was going to be enough horsepower to handle the load.
But doing the math, it should have worked.
It should have worked.
That's the thing is we always thought we were like zooming ahead and being prepared, and it
did not work at all. But it was
work.
like nerds in their gear were like, I'll just solve this with raw horsepower. And then at some point we're like, let's just put it on a flat text file page that can get served really fast. Because it turns out even when you tweak WordPress, you get 7-page views a second or some nonsense.
Then we ran into that's when we ran into the hiccup that we'd post the link, and then we were getting these regional delays because they were
we got like some global load balancer that just does not put up with, you want all these things to happen the same second?
They were like,
that won't work.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So lots of stories around that. Eventually we got it all figured out. We went to the cloud.
Yeah, and our own code.
That
made all the difference in the world.
Written by a couple super smart people. A guy named Lemon.
Yeah, some dude named Lemon. I don't know where the hell he is anymore, but thanks, Lemon.
Yeah, and it's worked the way it's intended to, whether or not people agree with it, but it's been working the way it's been intended to ever since.
Yeah.
So,
and related to the ticket stuff, you became your own payment processor fairly early in the process. What was the thinking behind that?
So we used global payments for quite a while to be our credit card processor. Part of it, weird bit of history. Some of the Shmoo group members, myself included,
worked that one right there.
Worked at a credit. We were trying to be a global credit card processing company in the late 90s, focused on a protocol called SET.
We'll call this a failed startup.
It was a completely failed startup, but it was a protocol called SET, which is a smart card based credit card processing protocol that Visa, MasterCard, and Microsoft designed, that they basically rug pulled out from under us in 99, which totally killed all the companies that were building SET products. But we all knew a lot about credit card processing. So when it came time to do this, we're like, oh, we'll just hook up to the processing networks and do it ourselves. And that worked out actually reasonably well
for a while.
Yeah. And then Global Payment, their business model is not really people who just do a ton of transactions on one day a year and nothing else, because they just assume like you're buying cocaine or whatever. And so one year they're like, peace out, go somewhere else.
They killed our account. They were like, nope, no more, you're gone. And it was literally like 2 days before ticket sales that they let us know. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
No, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I'm going to get approved for something else, whatever, like every ticket sales round in those days. But I was like, what are we going to do? But we signed, I don't know, we've been through 2 or 3.
Then we just went to Stripe. Stripe had just started to become like a real thing.
Was it straight to Stripe?
It was straight to Stripe. And we're like, God, I hope this works. And click, and Stripe's like,
no,
works for us.
It was relatively new. And I was like, I can really just sign up. I don't have to talk to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, Stripe definitely democratized.
I do remember doing that, but I thought there was something in between.
I don't think so. I think we went straight.
Or maybe I just remember doing research.
But yeah, we still back end into Stripe, but we still ended up processing. It goes through us, but we don't store any of it. We just didn't want to punch you over to a Stripe page, which in hindsight, I guess we could have done, but
it was already written.
Yeah, once we wrote it, we're like, screw it. We'll just keep doing it.
I want to be mindful of our time. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, but I wanted to ask you what are you hoping the legacy of ShmooCon is now that it's concluded?
I think what I hope the most is I hope that it's provided inspiration. I hope that people who have attended over the years, or even just this one time, know what the art of the possible is. I hope that they found their community. I hope that the event itself has inspired people to attend other events, find other events, or produce either for the events or potentially their own. I think that creating community and creating spaces where people can just come and learn is so important, and share ideas. I don't think about the concept of legacy too much.
Yeah, I think the empowering people to feel like they can do these things is a big part of it. And then for me, like, I was always drawn to this industry as a way to like make the world a little bit better. Like, I always took very passionately my job and my charge to protect whatever organization or entity that I was charged to protect. And whether it was credit card processing or the state of Alaska's internet or whatever, I always felt very passionately about it. And I know I learned a lot from people and resources that were willing to give freely of their time and energy to me to learn. And I think continuing that kind of legacy of, hey, this all works when we're open and we help build the next generation of folks without much regard to the personal benefit to ourselves. Because it turns out making money in cybersecurity is a bit like falling out of bed. You don't need to try real hard and you can still have a good job at doing it. I think it's a little cavalier, but it's a growing industry, and like modular microeconomic trends of here and there and layoffs. I don't mean to trivialize what individuals are going through, but in general, the industry continues to grow, continues to be a more and more important part of global economy and global society. And not to lose sight of some of the foundational ethics and morals that created that part of the industry, I think is important. And I think we did our part to carry that forward.
It's just, I think when I think about, I like ShmooCon, the history of ShmooCon and what ShmooCon was, it just is. And it's whatever the people who benefited from attending, it's their successes in the future that will speak to what we did. And it's not about us. It's never has been.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know, just a weird, I just don't think like that, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The legacy is all of yours to carry on in the way, carry it forward and do good things.
Yeah.
For sure. But what's next for you two? What kind of plans do you have moving forward from ShmooCon?
Oh, so many.
Yeah, right now, like my thing is I started a new product company a couple of years ago, and Heidi's been our COO, and so I'm keeping her occupied for once. And with the con, it was the other way around for 20 years, and now it's my turn.
Except he pays me. It's novel.
Yeah, I never got paid. I just had.
Well, I didn't get paid either. Just
right. Yeah. There was, but then you've got other things cooking.
I do. I'm not done in the hacker event space yet. I think I announced at the closing that I've had now for a while another company stood up called Moose Meet, MET, kind of a cute nod to all our moose lore around the con. And I plan to be doing a few smaller events under that moniker. Nothing set in stone yet, but I've got some big ideas that'll probably start. There'll probably be some more public information about those coming out, I would say probably in the next 3 months. But so we've got that going on. We've got our new company. We're still both out in the community a fair bit, speaking, just, volunteering where we can.
Yeah, we're not going away.
We'll definitely be around.
Other than at these events, where can people find you online if they wanted to connect with you?
Probably LinkedIn is the best place right now.
Yeah.
I'm at GDead on most of the major social media things. I'm longtime Deadhead, and I still claim I DJ'd what I believe to be the farthest north Grateful Dead hour in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've not actually gone on the map to prove that there hasn't been one farther north, but Fairbanks being 60 miles south of the Arctic Circle is pretty far north. So I'm longtime Deadhead. So if you see GDead Shmoo anywhere on the internet or just GDead, it's probably me.
Yeah, Bruce and Heidi Potter, GDead Shmoo, Heidi Shmoo.
Yeah,
that usually finds us.
That finds.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you sitting down with us to talk about just how ShmooCon originated and how it changed over the years. Thank you, Erin, for joining me from the attendee perspective, from somebody who attended all 20, which is
That's amazing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
A lot of luck. Don't be wrong.
Thank you for being there the entire time. It's awesome to hear that.
Awesome. Thank you to our listeners for joining us. And we hope you join us again next week for another all new episode of Breaking Badness. Thanks, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.